Hi, I'm Stephen Weintraub, and this is my presentation of what it takes to win in Texas. This is a data-centric presentation about the elections and how to beat Republicans in November. So, what is this presentation about? Well, first, I'm going to talk about the makeup of the electorate, and I'll try to explain why the electorate votes the way they do, and how we can persuade more of them to vote Democratic. Once we do that, I'll examine what could be the possible results and where do we find the targets to achieve this result. But before I begin, I need to make some apologies. First, I am a data nerd. That means I may go down a rabbit hole of data and get you lost. I don't mean this. I'll try to get out as quickly as possible. Just remember, this is my nature. Second, I may say some things that upset people. This isn't me being mean or nasty. It is simply that the data will say some things which contradict some people's very hard beliefs about electioneering. I held some of those beliefs myself, but I'm trying to follow the data. Third, I am an independent Democrat. That means I am independent of any organization of the party in making this presentation. This is my view and not any club's or party's view of the election. Finally, I live in Austin, Texas. So a lot of the data in this presentation center around Austin and Travis County. This is because this is the data I have readily available, but it is easily translatable to other areas. So let's start by talking about the makeup of the electorate. How many Democrats and Republicans are there in Texas? In 2021, CDP did a study and they came up with 5.7 million Democrats and 5.2 million Republicans. Yes, there are 500,000 more Democrats than Republicans in the state. But the real problem is there are 6 million other voters, and these voters, for various reasons we'll discuss, vote Republican. Then earlier this year, the Independent Voter Project came up with a study, and they said there were 8.1 million registered Democrats and 6.6 million registered Republicans. Well, you should immediately question this because when did the Democrats ever get 8.1 million votes? But the real thing which tells you what this is about is the word registered. There are no registered Democrats or registered Republicans because there is no registration. Independent Voter Project is not counting voters. They're counting people and throwing them into the Democrat or Republican bucket. If you watch certain social media, shop at certain stores, watch certain news, you're either a Democrat or a Republican, and you get thrown into that bin. What there really are 8.1 million partisan people who are partisanly Democrat, and there's 6.6 million people who actually believe in the Republican agenda. If you've been following the polling for years, this is not a surprise. In Texas, the majority of people poll agreeing to the Democratic agenda. 70% want a state income tax. 70% want to expand Medicare. 89% want universal background checks. 67% want living minimum wage. And you can go on, issue after issue. And the people of Texas agree with the Democratic Party. Why does the electorate vote the way they do? Well, my very simplistic answer is gerrymandering. If the Republicans aren't the majority, how do they get gerrymandered? The answer is you don't need a majority gerrymander, you just need control. And in 2003, the Republicans got control of the Texas House, Senate, and governorship. And Tom DeWine noticed this, and he got Texas to gerrymander. Then, once you gerrymander, the nonpartisan voters drift to the party their districts are gerrymandered for. This isn't anything but a simple herd instinct. All your elected officials are Republican, all your media is Republican, all your influences are Republican, As a result, you kind of with Republican, and if you get gerrymandered the other way, they'll gradually drift back. I actually call this fellow traveler syndrome. On top of that, gerrymandering causes voter distrust and disaffection. This causes the electorate to vote less strongly, giving even stronger control to the party in control. So, gerrymandering isn't caring about the voter, it's caring about creating districts to stay in power. As a result, voters get more frustrated and are more less likely to vote when they are disenfranchised by gerrymandering. And what most people don't realize is further causing voters to be less likely to vote is that. So the question becomes, how can we persuade more people to vote Democratic? Well, so the question is, how can we persuade more voters to vote Democratic? Well, we need to start by looking at the political spectrum. Most people think of the political spectrum as looking like this, a continuum from bright red gradually turning into blue. This is not the spectrum I want you to think of. I want you to think of the spectrum as this. A solid core of Democrats, a solid core of Republicans, and the independents sitting between them, waiting to be wooed. And, as we've seen already in the polling, the majority of those Democrats are already leaning left. So, why are they voting for us? Because we don't talk to them. We need to talk to them on their issues. So, what are the issues these people care about? Well, when asked, the moderates say 24% of them believe affordability is the most important issue they are facing today. And when combined with all other economic issues, 57% say economy is their most important issue. It's the economy, stupid. And what do they think of our issues? Well, not much, it turns out. Border security is, they only think 4% think it's important. Abortion, 2%. AI, 2%. And LGBTQ doesn't even register. This does not mean they don't believe abortion should be available or that gays shouldn't have rights. They just don't think it's the leading issue we should be talking about. I want to point out there's this poll here into Latinos on abortion. I cannot find a poll talking to moderate Latinos about abortion. But what I did do is I found polls asking Latinos in general about abortion, and 57% of them believe in open abortion versus 10% who want it banned. So even the Latinos generally are on the Democratic side on this issue. So what can we learn from this? Well, first, the majority of independents and Democrats agree on most issues, and the Republicans and Democrats don't even talk on the issues these voters care about. As a result, these voters feel highly ignored, they dislike both parties equally, and they turn their ears off whenever we start talking about our issues. It's not that they don't care about our issues. They just, when they hear us talking about abortion, even when we link it to economy, they think, oh, they're doing it again. They're talking among themselves. So, what do we have to do? Well, since the others and Democrats agree, we already own the center. In many ways, you can say the Democrats aren't a leftist party, we're a party of the center. We don't have to compromise the issues to go for the center. We already have it. We only have to compromise on what we talk about. So, let me start by explaining some basic terms. First is swing versus persuasion. Swing is the amount of vote which has changed. Persuasion is the art of getting swing. They're used somewhat interchangeably, but one is the action and one is the result. The second is get out the vote. We all think we know what the term get out the vote is, but we all have slightly different definitions. Here I have a definition of get out the vote, which has both a positive and negative value. Now, neither of these terms are actually well-defined terms in the political spectrum, but as a mathematician, I have to define them broadly. So let me explain what they actually mean. Imagine we have an election in which 46% people voted and 54% of them didn't. And in that 46% who voted, 48% of them voted Democratic and the rest Republican. So what do I mean by a 5% swing? What I mean is 5% of the voters, not the Republicans, the voters, voted one way and are now voting the other way. In that way, they have swung from one party to the other. It's the total number of voters, not one party. So now let's discuss what I mean by get out the vote. If you look at the non-voted area, you can actually, through heuristic algorithm, determine how many of them would be Democrats and how many of them would be Republicans. So get out the vote means getting 5% of the people who were Democrats to vote at this time when they didn't vote before. So it's 5% of the people who did not vote, not the base, not the, these are people who did not vote before and are now voting this time. And again, that adjusts the percentages again. And finally, I want to talk about negative get out the vote. Obviously, you can't get less of a non-vote than a non-vote. What I mean by negative get out the vote is 5% of the people who voted for one party decide they're disenchanted and don't vote at all. So as a result, another change in the percentages. These three values can adjust how you look at an election. So I'll start by saying that data modeling isn't that hard. The first thing you need to do is decide what previous elections you're going to use to make your predictions off of. Now you have to choose these elections carefully or you get bad results. Once you've chosen the right elections, you can apply swing and get out the vote effects on the base elections to predict possible future results. Now, I have created a complex spreadsheet which actually does all this for me. I'm not going to go through the 12 pages of the spreadsheet with you. I'm not that mean. But I will explain what the spreadsheet does say about the election. The first thing is the basis of the votes, this top graph area here. If I choose the basis of the votes correctly, then applying my model to that basis, I should be able to predict what we currently have when there's no swing and no get out the vote effects. So for my modeling, I choose the 26 Railroad Commission and Supreme Court races. Why these two races? A lot of reasons. First, it's an off-year election, which means it's a very different electorate than in a presidential year. And it's the electorate we're caring about this time. Moreover, these two races are very anonymous. How many people here can remember who ran for Railroad Commission? Unless Luke Warford is in the House, I doubt I'm the only one. So, how does these two races predict the current setup in the House, Senate, SBOE, and Congress? Well, it predicts we'll have 62 Democratic House members, which is right on. It predicts that we have 11 Democratic senators, 5 members of the SBOE, and 13 members of the U.S. Congress. All spot on. These two elections model the electorate perfectly. And that's why I go with them. Now, when you apply it to the newly districted districts, we get 9 Democrats and 29 Republicans, which means we've lost 4 seats. Now, I know you've heard the Republicans say it's 5 seats, but if you follow the data, it's only 4 seats. So why do the Republicans say it's 5 seats? It's because they use the wrong basis for election. They are using the 24th front results as the basis of their election. As a result, when they apply them to the model, they get way off. They're off by 8 in the Texas House, by 2 in the Senate, 1 in the SBOE, and 2 in Congress. And then when they apply it to the redistricted districts, they get -5. In other words, they get the -5 because they used the wrong basis for election. When we say -5, we are just repeating the Republican talking basis. Let's stop doing that. Now, the real question is, do the Republicans actually believe it's -5? Or are they only saying it as a talking point? If you look at how they behave during redistricting, how they're behaving on election and everything else, they actually believe this is the proper basis for election. The problem is, once you have the wrong basis for election, everything goes off. The targets you choose are wrong. The predictions you make are wrong. The areas you go to are wrong. And so by choosing the wrong basis, they are at a disadvantage to people who use the right basis. I'm not going to correct them. So once you choose the basis of elections, you can apply it and get the results. Here you see a grid which is exactly the right results. And then once you have the results, you apply the 3 parameters. How much swing you get, how much Democratic swing you get, and how much Republican swing you get. So let's play with these numbers and see what happens. Let's start with 4 points of swing. Well, you see, it's really not that much of a different result. We get 4 seats in the House, that's very minor. We get 1 seat on the SBOE, and we only lose 2 congressional seats as opposed to 4. It's good, but it's not that good. If we go up to 5 swing, then we start seeing something interesting. In the Senate race, we win it. At 5 swing, we get Senator Tallarico. This is a very doable number. This is 5 swing with no get out the vote. We get the Senate. And if we go to 6 swing, it gets even better. Because with 6 swing, we get a Governor Hinojosa and a Lieutenant Governor Goodwin. We also get 7 seats in the House, which is not bad, and we're only down 1 congressional seat. So let's jump to 8 points of swing. In 8 points of swing, we win every statewide race, and we lose no congressional seats. That's at 8 points of swing. That's extremely doable in the current environment. And I'll talk about that in a second. But that is a reachable goal. And if we add get out the vote on top of it, let's say 7 points to get out the vote, and we assume the Republicans are a little disenchanted of our prospects, then not only do we win every statewide race, and we actually gain a seat in Congress, we actually take over the Texas House. Now, I want you to look at those numbers. 8 points of swing, 7 points to get out the vote. These are numbers, with a little effort, we can easily get. In fact, let's ask a really important question. What is our current swing? Well, if you look at what was the result of the March primary, it's dramatic. If you use the Republicans metric, it's a 20.4% swing. Now, I've already talked to you about how the Republican metric is wrong. So let's go to my metric. And it's at 15.8% swing. That is still gigantic. That's twice as much as an 8-point swing. So what is it in current polling, you may ask? Well, the Texas Public Opinion Research Institute says it's 9%. The UT Political Project says it's 13%, and Texas State University says it's 5%. Well, when you look at these, we'll just say it's 10%, because that's what it comes out to. But let's first go back and look at what a 15.8% swing would mean. It is dramatic. Not only do we win every statewide House seat, in the Texas House, we get a supermajority. We get 107 of the 150 seats. We actually retake the Senate and the SBOE, and in congressional seats, we not only gain back a few, we actually win 33 of the 38 seats, a net gain of 20. This isn't a wave. This is a tsunami. Texas isn't turning blue. It is turning deep blue at 15.8%. That, as I said, I really believe the polls are showing a 10.5% swing. But let's look at that one. Not quite as dramatic, but we win every statewide race. We capture the Texas House. We also gain 2 congressional seats. So right now, we are in a winning position. We were in a better winning position in March, and we have kind of petered our way through indecision and fighting, and we need to get that back. So once we have the decision on the grid on how to predict races, we can actually come up with grids for each race. So for example, this is the grid for the statewide race. This will tell you what it takes to win the statewide race. On the x-axis, you have the Democratic get out the vote, and on the y-axis, you have the Democratic wave. So, and you can use this by crossing the 2 axes. For example, if I have 6 points of wave, I need 7 points of get out the vote to win statewide races. If I have 7 points of wave, I need 3 points of get out the vote in order to win all the statewide races. And if I get 8 points of swing, I actually don't need any get out the vote to win the statewide races. Now, does this mean if we have 8 points of swing and you win every statewide race? No. This is a generic model. Each race is different. When you start putting in money, incumbency, the quality of the campaigns, the understanding of the voters, the line gets moved back and forth. That's the goal of every candidate, to start moving their swing and their get out the vote to make it a victory. And right now, we're off this graph on the top, and we have a Democratic victory. So this is how you read the win lines. But you can also use the win lines for some interesting results. So we can use it to determine which is more important, persuasion or get out the vote. Well, looking at the data, on the 6th way, we have 4 steps to get out of the vote. And on the 7th points of way, we have another 4 steps of get out the vote. And at 8 points, 5 steps. And on the others, 4 steps. In other words, 1 point of swing is equal to 4 or 5 points of get out the vote. It is a lot more powerful in many ways. So to win statewide and not lose a single congressional seat, it only takes 8 points of swing, but it takes 31 points of get out the vote. That's 31% of the people who did not vote last time. At this point in time, I want to talk about the Travis County Coordinated Campaign. For Travis County, they're trying to get a 70% turnout with a 72% Democratic majority. The 72% Democratic is not hard in Travis County. That should be easy. The hard part is getting the 70% turnout. Our turnouts have been going down and down over the last few elections. And the last time we got over 70%, it was a presidential year. In the non-presidential year, we get 52% generally. And so in order for the Travis County Party to get their goal, they actually have to get 51% of get out the vote to make their goal. I'm not going to say whether I think that's possible or not, but I want you to think about that. So remember, when I talk about it, swing is the number of voters who change from one party to the other, who have already voted. And get out the vote is the people who haven't voted for a party now vote. So, which is more important, persuasion or get out the vote? I think I pretty much showed you it's persuasion, but the answer is we need both. So 8% swing with no get out the vote gets 8 Texas House seats, and the Republicans still hold the House. But when we add 6% get out the vote, we get 14 Texas House seats, and we take control of the House. We need both swing and get out the vote. So let's look at a few more win lines. Remember I said the win lines were generic. Well, in some races, we don't have to have generic candidates. For example, in the governor's race, ends out, the governor's race this year has the same candidate who, well, let's look at the governor's race. The governor's race says that with a 6% get out the vote, we win a governor in Minnesota. That's a very makeable metric. Now the question is, why is the governor's race any different from the statewide race? And the answer is, the governor's race is not generic like the statewide race. We know who the candidate for governor is, and it's the same candidate as 4 years ago. And we can use those numbers to model the election. So as a result, for governor, we can predict better the line it takes to win. And the same holds for lieutenant governor. And in both those cases, it's a 6-point vote. Now comes an interesting case, the attorney general race from 4 years ago. We can use that race to predict another race, not the attorney general race, but 4 years ago, the attorney general candidate was Ken Paxton, which means we can use that race to foresee the Senate race. And if we look at that race, it only takes a 5-point swing to win the election. So with proper modeling, we can see all these races are within graph. We only have to do it. Now we can apply this metric not just to the state races, we can actually apply them to congressional races. You can apply them to House race, Texas House and Senate races, SBOE races, actually any race in the state. You can also apply them to counties. So for example, here's Williamson County. Here we see that Williamson County is about to turn blue. And we need to make it so this election. But if we look at Hays County, we see that Hays County is already blue. Let's keep it that way. So the next question is, how do we find the targets we want to get out? Well, I'm going to start with swing, because as we discussed, swing is the most powerful of the two. So how do we find the voters to flip? Well, I think you just need to remember the spectrum. We're not trying for the strong Republicans, they won't split. We're looking for the independents who are leaning Republican partisanly, but vote Republican. These are our targets. These are the voters who are the occasional voters, the fed up voters, the hate both party voter. These are the people who just are tired of this system as it lies today. And then these would be people who have partisanship or Dem support scores between 40 and 80%. But there's another way you can find swing voters. From 2022 to 2024, a lot of people switched from the Democratic to the Republican Party. Maybe we can flip them back. They might be the easiest to flip back. So I did this analysis for a statewide campaign, and I did it on a precinct to precinct level across the state. When we did this, we actually played a game of guessing where the precincts were. And we actually were a little surprised. So of the top 100 precincts, there were that flipped from 20 to 22, 60 are in the counties bordering the Rio. This was no surprise for us. This was actually the number one guess among us. But, and of those, the highest majority of them are in Hidalgo and Cameron County. This isn't a surprise either. They were heavily hit by the Republicans trying to flip the congressional districts down there. But the problem is actually border-wide. It goes all the way up to El Paso. Now comes the surprise. When we were guessing, we guessed the suburbs of Dallas or Houston. And we were wrong. Of the other 40 precincts, 16 of them are in precincts with high concentration of college students. 8 are in Travis County. 3 are in College Station. 5 are in other college areas, including Lynn and Waco. When I presented this to the campaign manager, he said, well, maybe we didn't have a good get out the vote in those areas in 2024. But that's not the fact. It's some of these areas, we had a 400 increase in the amount of Republican votes. So we are losing students, and we need to find out why. They are the future. Once their patterns of voting are set, it will be hard to set them back. I don't know the reason, but that's something we need to figure out. So the next question is, where do we find the voters who didn't vote before? Well, that's actually not a hard problem. The first thing is you look at a map of partisan areas of an area, in this case, Travis County. Notice the areas which are the most blue, the most partisan. Now you look at a map of where turnout was low and high, and where the low turnout occurred. Then you do a mathematical marriage of those maps, and you get a map which looks like this, showing where the most Democratic votes were left on the table. Precincts have more than 2,000 net Democratic votes which can be retrieved. 92 precincts in Travis County had more than 1,000. This is over 110,000 votes we could retrieve in Travis County by targeting the right precincts. So what are these precincts? Well, in Travis County, we group precincts by area and have people in charge of the precincts in those areas. The first one is East Travis County, with Sabrina Riches as the precinct chair for the whole area. Actually, super precinct chair, that's what we call these areas. That's the number one undervote area in Travis County. It's our highest opportunity area for votes. The number 2 area for opportunity votes is Blue Boulevard. Carol Dubois as the super precinct chair. She's doing a wonderful job. That actually may fall off as number 2 this time, because Of course, number two goes back to 2022, before two was super precincts here. And the third area of votes is the area of South Congress between I-35 and South Congress. This is actually two different super precincts, Bosca with Joe Casino and Far South Central with Jody Harrison as the respective chairs. So we now know how to find the targets. Now we can look at districts and we can figure out which ones are the most flippable. So I'm going to just quickly do this for statewide. First, I'm going to start with the congressional districts and put them in order of what I think are the most flippable in order. The first one is 34, which is Cameron County up to Nueces County. It is the most flippable district in Texas. Number two is its sister district, 15, with Montana Cruz facing a tough battle. This district goes from Hidalgo County all the way up to there. The next one is District 35. This is the district Greg Casar gave up in order to run in 37. But he should have stayed. It was a very flippable district, and we could have had another Democrat easily with him as the candidate. The next one is number 23, which I know there are larger groups trying to help with get that turned. That's followed with number 9, which is East Houston. Then comes a 32, which is Dallas County going to Rusk and Palestine. 24 in Tarrant County, and then that's the whole slew. I won't actually go through the same detail with the house targets, but if you ask, I will tell you what they are. The one thing I will tell you about is in Williamson County, there were two target districts. One is 52 with Jeremy Jimenez as the candidate, and the other is number 20 with Matthias Early as the candidate. Both are very flippable. I've been working with both campaigns and giving them information, but any help we can give them from Travis County is 2 more seats in the Texas House. So, in summary, what do we know? We know actually moderate voters actually agree with the Democrats and progressive on policy. In fact, we're not a left party, we're a center party because of that fact. We also know that persuasion is 4 times as powerful as get out the vote. But we also know from the numbers we need both. So go out and hit those doors. We need them. We also know, looking at the polling, the race is ours. If we don't win it, it's our fault. But actually, the more we run up the score, the bluer Texas will be. And finally, we need to target areas of large numbers of undervoted votes and areas we can flip. So I leave you with this one quote, which I truly believe to be the mantra for the election. We already have the center. We don't have to compromise on the issues to go for the center. We only have to compromise on what we talk about. Questions?